Nathaniel Chase sat in his gleaming black Rolls-Royce, idling near the curb of a modest neighborhood in Atlanta. The tinted windows concealed his world-weary eyes and a soul worn thin by board meeting, investment summits, and shallow banquets. He was a billionaire before the age of 40. He owned skyscrapers, fleets of private jets, and had a name etched in Forbes as one of America's top visionaries. Yet, for all his wealth, Nathaniel felt strangely bankrupt emotionally, spiritually, humanly. He checked his gold wristwatch and sighed. His driver Leonard glanced through the rearview mirror. "Everything, all right," said. "Drive me somewhere. People do not wear suits to impress one another." Leonard raised his eyebrows but nodded. He knew better than to ask questions. The city passed them in a quiet blur until they reached a small tucked-away diner called Maple and Soul, nestled between a laundromat and a tired-looking bookstore. Nathaniel said flatly, stepping out without waiting for a response. The diner smelled of cinnamon waffles, old leather booths, and morning hope. It was busy but not loud. The walls were adorned with community pictures, graduations, birthdays, and dance recitals. Nathaniel sat in the far corner, away from the windows, silently observing. A few minutes later, a waitress approached. Her name tag read Tamara. She was in her early 30s, her uniform crisp but fit. Her deep brown skin glowed with effort, and her smile, though tired, was genuine. "Good morning, sir. Can I get you some coffee to start?" Nathaniel looked up, surprised by the warmth in her voice. He nodded. "Yes, thank you." She poured the coffee gracefully, as if it were an art. Something about her presence quieted the noise inside his head. But what caught his attention most was the boy sitting in the booth nearest the jukebox. He was no older than 9. His wheelchair was worn but clean. His arms moved with awkward stiffness, and his head tilted slightly to one side. Yet his eyes, those wide, joyful eyes, shone like stars. "That is my son," Tamara said softly, catching Nathaniel's gaze. "His name is Isaiah." Nathaniel blinked. "He seems ... Happy." Tamara smiled gently. "He is. We dance together every Saturday. The customers do not mind. It is his favorite part of the week. Dance." Nathaniel echoed. She nodded. "He cannot walk, but he leads with his heart." It was nearly noon when Tamara finished serving the last of the brunch rush. Then, as if on cue, she wheeled Isaiah toward the middle of the diner. She whispered in his ear, and his face lit up. A soft jazz tune began to play from the jukebox. Customers leaned back in their seats, smiling. Some pulled out phones to record the moment. Tamara took her son's hands, and together they began to sway. She moved gracefully, but it was Isaiah who guided their rhythm, with his head bobbing to the beat and his hands leading her turns. Nathaniel felt something shift in his chest. It was not pity. It was all. Here was a woman who had likely seen the worst life had to offer, yet she danced. She danced because her son could not, and she let him lead because love meant giving dignity, not charity. A tear, uninvited, slid down Nathaniel's cheek. He wiped it away quickly, but the ache in his chest deepened. Back in his penthouse that evening, Nathaniel stared out over the skyline, but all he could see was the boy in the wheelchair and the mother who danced with him as if the world were perfect. He remembered his own mother, how she raised him alone, cleaning hotel rooms by day and studying English by night. She died before she could see what he became. He never had a chance to dance with her. He never gave her that joy. He picked up his phone and called Leonard. "I want to go back to that diner tomorrow."
"Yes, sir."
"And Leonard, this time, do not bring the Rolls-Royce. Take the Chevy. Something ... normal." For the next 2 weeks, Nathaniel visited Maple and Soul every Saturday. Each time, he chose the same seat. Each time, he watched the dance. And slowly, he learned more. He learned that Tamara worked 2 jobs to keep Isaiah's therapy going, that she once wanted to become a teacher, that Isaiah had cerebral palsy from birth, but never let it stop him from smiling, that they lived in a 2-bedroom apartment above a garage. Yet Tamara always said, "We are blessed." Nathaniel asked fewer questions and listened more. He helped clean tables once, quietly paid for the bills of other customers, left anonymous tips, and then came the day Tamara found a white envelope in the pocket of her apron. Inside was a letter. "You once said your son leads with his heart. It is time someone followed his example." Enclosed is a scholarship for his full-time therapy and education. Also included is the down payment for a home is in your name. Please accept this with no strings attached. You have already given more than you will ever know. A friend who learned to dance again. Tamara never saw Nathaniel place the envelope, but she guessed. She confronted him the next weekend, tearfully refusing the offer. "I am not a charity case," she said. Nathaniel stood and looked her in the eye. "That is exactly why you deserve it." They sat in silence. Then Isaiah wheeled up beside them. "Mom," he said clearly, "can Mr. Nathaniel dance with us today?" Tamara looked at her son, then at Nathaniel. The billionaire swallowed hard. "I would be honored." And for the first time in decades, Nathaniel Chase stepped into a dance, not choreographed by wealth, power, or status, but by love. Thomas Kingsley was a man the world envied. Billionaire by the age of 35, founder and CEO of Kingsley Innovations, and a staple on the front page of every major financial magazine. With tailored Italian suits and a penthouse view of Manhattan, He embodied success, yet behind his crisp attire and steel-eyed gaze was a soul dried out by disappointment and bitterness. It had been 6 years since Thomas had last visited his childhood town of Atlanta, Georgia. It was not grief that kept him away, nor nostalgia, it was pride. His father, a mechanic with oil-stained hands and an affection for jazz music, had raised him alone. But Thomas had never forgiven the world for the poverty he endured growing up. Success became his weapon, and wealth his armor. On a warm Friday evening in spring, Thomas returned not because he wanted to, but because of an obligation. The community center that once sheltered his youth needed funding, and the mayor invited him as a guest of honor at a charity gala. The thought of mingling with people from his past irritated him, but his PR team insisted it would soften his public image. Just smile, write a check, and leave, he muttered to himself as his limousine pulled up to the modest hall near the old part of town. Inside, the air was filled with laughter, jazz music, and a warmth Thomas had not felt in years. He stood near the back, expression unreadable, scanning the room filled with local teachers, mechanics, retired veterans, and the city's youth, people he would have once called neighbors, now just reminders of a life he tried to forget. And that was when he noticed her. A black waitress, probably in her mid-30s, moved gracefully between tables in a modest blue dress and apron. Her name tag read Leona. Despite the sweat on her brow and the heavy trays she balanced, she carried herself with quiet dignity. What struck Thomas most, however, was not her presence, but the child she guided with one hand as she worked. The boy, perhaps 9 or 10 years old, had leg braces and walked with a slight limp. His arms moved awkwardly, and his eyes darted around with a mixture of joy and uncertainty. But every time he looked at his mother, his face lit up with unwavering trust. And every time she smiled back, it felt as though the room itself grew lighter. Thomas could not stop watching. After dinner, the local jazz band began to play a slow, melodic tune. The dance floor remained empty as people mingled over dessert and coffee. That was when Leona set her tray down, knelt in front of her son, and whispered something. The boy beamed, and with effort, rose to his feet. She took his hand gently, guiding him to the center of the dance floor. All conversation paused. Some guests smiled, others looked away with pity, but Leona did not care. Her eyes were locked on her son as though he were the only person in the world. The band shifted into a smooth, steady rhythm, and the boy began to move. Hesitantly at first, each step uncertain, each sway slightly off balance, but Leona matched his pace perfectly, letting him lead. There was no mockery, no impatience, only grace. Thomas felt something stir in his chest, a sensation so foreign it startled him. He remembered something he had buried deep beneath years of luxury, the feeling of being seen, believed in, and unconditionally supported. His mother had passed when he was only 7. His father had been all he had, and even with all the love in the world, there was no gentle dance, only survival. Leona's son stumbled slightly. A collective gasp rippled through the room, but she caught him with ease and whispered in his ear. The boy laughed, and then something extraordinary happened. The music swelled, and the child twirled not flawlessly. His mother followed his lead, and for a few breathtaking moments, the entire hall disappeared. There was only a mother and her son, dancing beneath the soft glow of overhead lights. When the song ended, silence hung in the air. Then, applause, thunderous, sincere, from every corner of the room. Some wiped tears, others stood. Thomas stood near. He sat, staring. He could not explain why, but after the gala ended, Thomas stayed behind. The crowd thinned, and eventually, only a few volunteers remained. Leona was collecting plates from the last tables when he approached her. "That was brave," Thomas said, his voice surprisingly gentle. She looked up, surprised. "Excuse me, the dance with your son. It was beautiful." Leona smiled. "Thank you. He loves to dance, even if his body does not always cooperate." Thomas hesitated. "I am sorry, I do not usually do this, but I wanted to say, your strength reminds me of someone. My father." "Is that so?" she replied cautiously. "He raised me alone," Thomas continued. "He was poor. I was angry about that for most of my life." Leona looked at him, a question forming in her eyes. "And are you still angry?" Thomas exhaled slowly. "Less so. Tonight." They talked for nearly an hour. Leona told him her son's name was Ezra, and he had cerebral palsy. Doctors had told her he might never walk. She refused to believe them. She worked 2 jobs, taught him to count by reciting recipes, and danced with him in the kitchen every evening. "He always wants to lead," she said with a laugh. "And I always let him." Thomas chuckled, then fell silent. "I have millions of followers online, shareholder meetings across the globe, private jets, smart houses, stock options. But watching you with your son, Dad, was the first time in years I felt something real." Leona did not reply with awe or admiration. She simply looked him in the eyes and said, "Then maybe it is time you start following something real." Those words hit him harder than any boardroom deal or financial loss ever had. That night, Thomas Kingsley did not return to his hotel. Instead, he sat in his car, staring out the window, consumed by thoughts he could not suppress. Something had shifted deep within him, something irreversible. Leona and Ezra had ignited a flame in him that no amount of corporate strategy or quarterly earnings reports could have sparked. He pulled out his phone and opened his calendar, meetings, flights, mergers. Then he did something no assistant had ever witnessed before. He cleared his schedule for the next 3 days. The following morning, he returned to the community center. It was still early, but the scent of biscuits and brewed coffee filled the air. Volunteers were setting up tables, and a few elderly people sat around the piano. Thomas spotted Leona sweeping near the kitchen. She paused, surprised to see him. "You again?" "I wanted to see Ezra," Thomas said. "I thought maybe we could." Leona raised an eyebrow. "Talk about what?" "I am not sure," Thomas admitted, "but I have this feeling that your son in your life is trying to teach me something." Leona smiled faintly. "He is with my neighbor right now. I have my morning shift. Can I wait?" She nodded slowly. "Only if you are willing to help me serve breakfast." It was not the reply a billionaire was used to hearing, but Thomas accepted. He rolled up his sleeves and served eggs and toast alongside Leona. Some recognized him, most did not. For the first time, Thomas Kingsley was not surrounded by investors or luxury, but by ordinary people with honest hearts. Hours later, when Ezra arrived and saw Thomas, his eyes lit up. "You came back," the boy exclaimed. Thomas crouched to meet his eye level. "I did. I was hoping you could show me some of your dance moves." Ezra grinned. "Only if you promise to let me lead again." Thomas laughed. "Deal." Over the next few days, Thomas spent more time with Leona and Ezra. He learned that Ezra's therapy was mostly self-guided due to the high costs. Leona had taught herself basic physical therapy techniques from online videos and books. She dedicated every free moment to helping her son move forward, literally and metaphorically. Thomas felt ashamed. He had donated millions to causes worldwide, yet here, in his hometown, was a woman fighting a silent battle alone. On the third evening, as they sat on the community center steps, Thomas asked her, "What do you dream of, Leona?" She looked at the fading sky. "I dream of Ezra dancing on his own. At his school graduation, no braces, just music and joy." Thomas's voice softened. "And for yourself?" Leona smiled wistfully. "I used to dream for myself. Now, I dream for him." Silence hung in the air, tender and raw. That night, Thomas returned to his penthouse in New York. But something was different. He did not feel at home. He opened his laptop and created a new folder. Project Ezra. 2 months later, the community center was buzzing with excitement. A special event was being held to celebrate its renovation, fully funded by an anonymous donor. No one knew the identity of the person responsible until a black SUV pulled up and Thomas Kingsley stepped out. He walked into the hall, not in a tailored suit, but in a plain shirt and jeans. At his side was Leona, and next to her, Ezra, his braces gone, replaced by specially designed orthopedic shoes. Thomas had arranged private therapy with some of the nation's top specialists. He had also secured a scholarship fund for children with disabilities in the Atlanta community. As the music began to play again, Ezra walked confidently onto the dance floor. Everyone held their breath. He turned to his mother and said, "Can I lead?" Leona nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. But this time, Ezra reached out a hand, not to his mother but to Thomas. "Would you like to dance too?" the boy asked. Thomas hesitated only for a second, then took the child's hand. The three of them danced awkwardly, laughing, joyful. There were no titles, no billionaires, no waitresses, no disabled children, only people. Months passed, and news spread of Kingsley Innovations launching a new division, Kingsley Foundation for Abilities and Inclusion. Its goal was simple: empower children with disabilities and support single parents who are often forgotten. Leona became the face of the foundation. She left her waitress job, not because she was rescued, but because she had become a leader. She gave talks, trained caregivers, and stood alongside medical experts who finally listened. Thomas, in turn, began to change. He visited more community centers, funded mentorship programs, and mentored children who reminded him of himself. But no matter how far he went, he always returned to Atlanta. Because Atlanta was where his life had been transformed by a mother's quiet strength and a child's bold dance.